1 hour.
The link is in the chat right there, so you can chat with whoever you want, and whoever comes, they can come. I might not broadcast this because it might be shit, so
Absolutely,
don't get your hopes up. So this might just be a conversation between Jal. So Jal stops trolling Paul. Maybe Paul learns something. Maybe Jal learns something. Okay. This is Block Time. I'm Michael Tidwell. I'm your host. Today I'm joined with Paul Stortz, and I'm joined with his favorite troll, Jal. And Jal actually made his username Paul Stortz is a liar and a con man. So he's obviously out there to grab attention. He wants Paul's attention. He wants to debate something, and Paul took time out of his busy schedule to debate. So I don't really know what the topic is. It's about Nash's ideal money. So I'll just kind of leave it to the experts in the room.
I don't think anyone knows what it's really about, but we're going to try and discover it.
Can I ask? So Jal is the attention grabber here. Jal, why did you call Paul a liar? I mean, it seems a little bit outrageous.
What's happened is Paul has said that John Nash's argument, ideal money, is saying something. He's explaining that it means something. And I'm saying it's wrong. And so he started quoting the argument, and I can show how he's pulling it out of context and how he's speaking about something he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Okay, so is that the justification where you called him a liar and a con man because he's interpreting something incorrectly? I'm just making sure I get the context right.
Yes, absolutely. The whole community has it so that I cannot argue. They won't let me into the argument. Now I'm in the argument. I really appreciate this. So
sure. So do you want to give like a quick 2-3 minute intro, and then maybe Paul can respond, and then you can go from there?
I think Paul might give the intro. He's
okay.
How he sees what Nash is saying in regard to inflation and purchasing power of money.
Well,
and we have 14 viewers now. All right.
Okay, great. So, you know, it's I don't really see. So again, the context for this is that there's this article, "The Many Faces of Bitcoin," in which the third face, so to speak, is this argument about Nash's ideal money. And my understanding of Nash's ideal money is that it wants it to be this kind of transferable utility shtick that he has, because, well, for a long list of reasons that are associated with his work in game theory, and how it would be really useful for like solving various games if you could just chop up all the utility and like redistribute it to people. So as I understand it, he wants to have this money just be this kind of abstract happiness, and he doesn't want its value to change over time like an investment. So he would want, and he's just quoted as saying that he wants to have this zero inflation rate for money, which obviously Bitcoin does not do anything like that, because in inflation, as it's understood in this context, is the change, the changes in prices, and Bitcoin has less and less money issued, fewer and fewer Bitcoins issued over time, and the economy becomes more and more productive over time. And so it's inevitably a deflationary currency, and Bitcoin doesn't do any price targeting of any kind. And so someone asked me what I thought of this article, and so I mentioned what I thought of each of the four faces, and in passing, in reference to the third face, the Nash ideal money face, I said a couple sentences inside of one tweet, and the first sentence was just this straightforward claim that Bitcoin itself is not the Nash ideal money, because it doesn't have that quality that Nash ascribed to the zero inflation rate. And then the second sentence was that I don't think that there will be any, if there's a healthy Bitcoin out there that is deflationary and is slowly gaining recognizability and gaining acceptance, and more people are hearing about it and using it, and it's becoming safer and more mundane, then I just don't see how the other currencies would survive. And I think that you would actually end up having just one, Bitcoin being the global currency of the world. And so those were the two sentences that I wrote. And then Michael Tidwell messaged me and asked me if I wanted to talk about drive chains at 7 p.m. today.
Okay, yeah. He put you in a position. So and this is one of your tweet. I'm reading the quote, and you can say if it is Nash ideal money aimed for consistent purchasing power per unit, but Bitcoin does not. That would be a succinct summary, right?
Yes.
And those are your words. Now I can ask you something because I have to do this a certain way, and the way I would do it would be to say, are you willing to stand behind that you have traversed Nash's works and you understand it and you're willing to argue me because I have, and we all know I claim I have. Are you willing to put your reputation behind that? Because you said that I have a reading comprehension problem. So I'm asking you in front of everyone. I'm asking you in front of everyone.
No,
are you
I'm
saying
not really sure what you mean by that.
Have you traversed the argument?
No, well, I don't know about traversed, but it's, as I say, I quote from the Wikipedia article that it's very simple, like one-line summary about the 0% inflation rate, and that's what that means, which is that the purchasing power wouldn't change over time.
So you've quoted something, and I'm trying to tell you that you've taken it out of context, and you haven't read all of the versions. You haven't even read this argument. And you're trying. Are you going to put your reputation on the line? Because
quite the contrary. Quite the contrary. I am not totally 100% familiar with it, and I'm not particularly interested in it because, again, the only context in which I was commenting on it was that someone asked me about where I was standing with respect to these four faces of Bitcoin. So it's completely possible that my understanding of it is imperfect, but I think the summary given on Wikipedia, if it's a question of just definitions, the summary is pretty short and pretty clear about what it means, and the meaning is a very generally well understood.
I made that summary.
I know I've heard that that's true, but it doesn't actually make any difference.
That I wrote those words, and you're quoting things that I put out, and you don't think that makes a difference because you're trying to say that this is how it is, but you haven't.
Yeah, but it absolutely does not make. If someone writes 2 + 2 = 4, it doesn't matter if they thought that they were writing the 2 + 2 = 5. 2 + 2 is still equals 4, so it doesn't matter who wrote it. That's called the ad hominem fallacy.
So as a scientist, you're going to tell me that you don't need to read the source material and that it's not possible that you've pulled this out of context. As a scientist,
it's completely possible that it's been pulled out of context, but
I'm telling you have, and I've read it.
Zhao, real quick, let me interject. What kind of scientist are you? Are you an economic scientist, or what is this?
I'm not, but when I'm referring to being a scientist, we're talking about someone who's searching for truth. Someone who, if you show them their
gotcha. Yeah. You're
no, but I'm waiting for it. I'm still waiting for it though. No, but I kind of think that's what I'm doing, right? Like I'm waiting for it right now. I mean, like, where's the explanation about how the Wikipedia are you saying that you intentionally wrote the Wikipedia article wrong in order to trick people into saying that there was a zero inflation rate and Nash ideal money? Like, I don't understand. Why don't you tell me what is Nash ideal money then? Why don't you give it to us and the audience?
Right. So now I can't necessarily right away resolve your understanding of that quote, but I'm going to put out what I think the argument is, and then we can weigh the observations. So the idea is to have every nation's currency on the same standard. So when you're talking inflation, now this isn't going to resolve it for you with that quote, but there's other quotes where he talks about inflation. And it's quite observable that he's talking about the international valuation. So when you talk about inflation, you're talking about a relative comparison, because to try and target the purchasing power of something, right? That is something you can't do. I
don't really understand what you mean by that. Because that's certainly what mainstream central bankers are trying to do all around the world. So that would be like
yes, they're targeting the local observation of the purchasing power, which then has a relevance to the rest of the world. And that system is creating booms and busts. It's a financial problem to be solved. Nash's proposal was not for central banks to do that. That's what they're trying to do.
I know, but you agree that inflation targeting is a real idea, at least. It's not
Yes.
like it's some totally incomprehensible statement that has no meaning in the real world, right? It has some real meaning in the real world. Like if I went down to a bank and asked them about it, they would know what I was talking about.
Yes,
and right, what they're talking about is trying to make sure that when you go to the supermarket and you buy a loaf of bread or whatever, even though food and energy are excluded from, of course, CPI and these other things, but basically when you're trying to buy whatever it is you buy, a 6-pack of beer or something, they're trying to make sure that on average your monthly budget or your yearly budget only increases by more or less exactly 2% a year or so. Like you can argue about whether or not it's a good idea or whether or not it has positive or negative consequences, absolutely, or what those are, which is great, but it is a real concept, and that is what they talk about, and they being most of it. Like if you read something on Wikipedia, the context of Wikipedia is that you would not want to use any fringe definitions there. So when someone says zero inflation rate, they do mean that the purchasing power doesn't change over time. That's what that means, basically.
But isn't it true, Paul, that you could have locally observed purchasing power be stable, but that your money can be declining in comparison to the rest of the world?
Yes, that is true.
So I just showed
you. That would be a 0% inflation rate still, though.
Depends what your observation point is, my friend.
I know, but that is the local one, is the one that is targeted.
And isn't that silly that we target a local one and we don't consider the international observation?
It may be silly or it may not, but that's what it means. And so
I'm giving you the argument of ideal money.
Someone could say, like, from even locally, the perspective of a hypothetical gold country that lives inside of the United States, that the exchange rate is changing from the people who use gold as money, or the Bitcoiners that live within the United States, and that they have different, their local and global purchasing power are diverging or changing or something like that. But when someone says, I don't know, you may be right or you may be wrong about what John Nash meant when he wrote about inflation, but in the context of everything that I've seen, including the Wikipedia article that you wrote, which is that the only reason that I'm talking about that specifically is because that is what I quoted on Twitter. You understand, like, this is not some kind of dogmatic worship of Wikipedia. I'm just saying this is what someone asked me about it, and I quoted it on Twitter. And so this is the source material to which I refer is an idea that is that has this concept that, because I am very familiar with this transferable utility kind of obsession, which I also find to be fascinating. And I think John Nash is a brilliant guy, and Tom Schelling is one of my favorite people of all time. So none of this is like an indictment of any of these people or their ideas, but you would agree, I don't know if this is the crux of the disagreement is on just the definition of the word inflation, but in almost all contexts, it is, even Austrians will admit that they have kind of lost the war over what people mean when they use the word inflation, even though they would say, well, we wish that it referred to changes in the money supply or changes in broad money or changes in whatever, there are some different metrics for that, of course. But even though Austrians say, well, we really think it should mean this, but when most people say inflation, it's generally agreed that they are talking about changes in this price level derived supposedly by the intersection of these aggregate supply and aggregate demand curves that I don't believe in, but in particular the aggregate demand curve. But that's a conversation for another time, because this idea of having just a vector of prices, which I do believe in, that just saying, well, we have all these prices around the world, and they have like the beige book that you're probably familiar with, where the Fed just has all these prices of everything in the economy, and they have these indices of these prices broken down different ways. I do believe that those indices are real, and I believe that when people are talking about inflation, they are talking about purchasing power, and they were talking about how much, you know, stuff you can buy with X amount of dollars. And I think that, do you agree? Do you disagree with any of that? Or if so, I'd love to know what you think's going on.
I understand it. I agree. Except I'm pointed out to you that you've misunderstood the quote that you've quoted. And
well, I may have, but I'm not talking about that yet. I may have misunderstood a quote.
Yeah. So
saying that you understand that.
Yes.
No, but you understand that. No, but you understand. So far it's fine, right? So far we've got zero inflation equals purchasing power doesn't change over time, right? So we got that cleared away. Yes.
We know what you cleared away was different people give a different definition to the word inflation depending on the context.
They certainly do, but I'm saying
that's what I agree with.
Right, but you agree that the overwhelming majority of people, even over like something like 87% of the professional economists of the world are like neoclassical, and they were definitely, and the others are monetarist, and so almost everyone. Not that this is necessarily an argument, because people are free to use whatever definitions they like as long as they're consistent. But I'm just saying that even the Austrian school people that I've talked to, they will say something like, well, I wish people still used inflation to refer to the much older definition about changes in the supply of money. But they accept that now when someone brings up inflation, unless they specifically designate otherwise, they're referring to changes in the price level. So I'm not just saying that people use whatever definitions they want. I'm saying there is a real definition for this.
Locally observed, right? Prices.
It depends a little bit on what you mean by local. I'm saying it's like the local currency and the local products.
Yes, and they get
foreign exchange,
and they get to determine it, and then foreign exchange becomes relevant in how the price is formed, right? And then Gresham's law, and
of course, but you think about this though, is that, you know, if you import a lot of your stuff before if you buy a lot of things that are imports, then if your currency loses value, you will experience inflation because everything will get more expensive in terms of your local currency. So it kind of includes it already.
Yes, it gets complex fast, but now we
didn't really think that part was that complex, right? You know, the imports get more expensive, then the prices go up locally. So that would be price inflation, according to the neoclassical standard definition.
Right. Okay. So this is all agreeable now.
Great. So that's great. So if there's zero inflation, then you have $20 and you can buy whatever it is, a 30 rack of beer, and then you can get in a time machine, and in a 0% inflation world, you take the time machine back in time and you'd have less than $20. We don't know exactly how many, but you'd be able to buy a 30 rack of beer somehow. Or it's actually unclear, because I believe Scott Sumner that all this is kind of nonsense because it's not properly grounded in utility theory, which is maybe a conversation for another time, or maybe it's a conversation for this time. But everyone should Google Scott Sumner's very short essay, Why Debates About Inflation Are Pointless. So I don't even really believe that inflation is a real thing. But nonetheless, when I read 0% inflation rate on Wikipedia, I know exactly what those words are supposed to mean, just like I know what the words like red and upside down and
now you're saying now you're trying to suggest that Nash doesn't know how to use that word properly, and you're falling on.
No, I think he did. Well, I don't know. Maybe he did, and maybe he did not. I don't know. But I'm just saying, in that context of Wikipedia and no other information to alter it, that is what that means. Is that you get in a time machine, you can still buy the same stuff. So it's super clear.
It sounds like to me we're arguing about the definition of inflation, how Nash used it, and how Paul's interpreting it. So why don't you just tell us what you think Nash, how he defined it and how he was using it in this context?
In economics, if you try to say that this is what Paul was saying, it's pointless to debate about inflation, as I understand what he was saying. You can't, it's about the subjective value theory. You can't target purchasing power because we have nothing to say what things should be worth. And so we do it. It's a central banking system. Some people call it the Keynesian system. And we take our prices and we aggregate them, right? But when things don't work out, we change it and we say, well, we need to incorporate this price and we need to incorporate less of this price. And so,
sorry, are you referring to the geometric weighting and the hedonic adjustments?
I'm being very, very broad and general, and I don't claim to like really know the specifics of how they work, right?
Yeah, because people bring that up a lot, and they affect the calculations like a tiny, like less than 1/10% or something. So I'm not sure, you know, but you know, it's true. Scott Sumner's essay basically says that you don't know whether or not, like, is the beer that was made in the past, is maybe it's better, or maybe what you really want to do is be one of the richest, you know, would you like to be Louis the 14th because he had no air conditioning or antibiotics and you couldn't get sushi like in France, but you would be like the top of the pecking order. So it's like, in one sense, Louis the 15th is richer than people living today, but in another sense, he's poorer than everyone. So it's kind of like, has there been tremendous inflation since then or deflation? And it's like, you can kind of throw it either way. The whole thing seems, you know, pointless. Like, would you rather have a really awesome TV, but everyone else around you has this tremendous virtual reality simulator that's really impressive to all the, you know, all the ladies or something, so they're all getting laid and you're not, or whatever. It's like the whole thing is kind of a circus because of utility theory. So Scott Sumner's essay is really short and very good. It's called Why Debates About Inflation Are Pointless. But nonetheless, I think we all agree that, but yeah, let's, but I want to hear more about what Nash is.
Let's let Jal say something.
Yes.
Right. Well, yeah, I want to know what's Nash's definition then of inflation, right, according to you.
No, he uses the word in different ways constantly through his
I know,
essays.
but it's still according to you, whatever it is.
So what we say, what's the relevant thing to say that helps straighten this misunderstanding out? And that is, so there's two ways. So in a world, see, you've said that you can't do that. That's Scott Summers or whoever essay, that it's a derogatory thing to say that John Nash would say we can target the purchasing power of money. You can't do that. For it to be stable, for it to have no inflation, you can't do that. So you'd be calling him
you
dumb.
can do that. You can do that. Like, you can target, like, you can make it so it's always worth, you know, a 6-pack of beer or something. But it's like debatable whether or not that is really preserving, like, the happiness over time or whatever.
Yes. So anyways, we can look at a scenario where there's either only one currency used in the world, right? We could say Bitcoin. So there's no other currencies, there's just Bitcoin. Or a scenario where all the central banks around the world, if inflation target the price of Bitcoin, so they keep their money on par of it. Those two scenarios, which are very different, they both satisfy Nash's argument. That's what we want. We want everyone on the same value standard. And that could happen if we all used only Bitcoin. It could also happen if the central banks all, for whatever reason, who knows, value targeted the same apolitical pricing.
I don't think it makes any. It doesn't make any sense to me. What's the definition of inflation again? I didn't catch what it was.
I've already told you he uses it in different ways. I can't give you Nash's definition of it.
Okay, well then, I thought that's what you were saying before, though.
Hey, real quick, can we talk about how the specific case of how Paul got it wrong? Can we talk about that definition specifically?
No, but I think that's what we were talking about, though, is that he's saying that I'm not using the word inflation the way Nash used it, which in the context of a Wikipedia article that quotes me directly, should be his.
It sounds like we're talking about a gotcha moment where Giles said, you took one instance of this in the Wikipedia article out of context. Well, why don't we just explore that specific example instead of, you know, looking at everything? Why don't we just talk about the specific thing Paul interpreted incorrectly, according to Giles? Why don't we just talk about that?
Trying to get it sent.
We'll do one thing at a time.
What he said was something like, I'll get the quote in a moment. What Nash said was, we feel that in regard to an ideal rate of inflation, no rate should be chosen, and that it would necessarily be zero. He's not saying.
Okay, but you said that you just said a moment ago, even though it was not an answer to the question I asked, but it doesn't matter. We'll just roll with it. You just said in a world where everyone only uses BTC, that would somehow qualify as ideal money being used everywhere.
Yes.
But that does not have a zero inflation rate. Or would you say that it would? Would you say the only Bitcoin world is in zero inflation rate?
He's talking about no, he's what he's talking about is this central banks around the world asymptotically starting to value target Bitcoin. And
no, that was the second thing. You said value targeting was the second thing, but you said the first thing, only BTC, that would qualify as ideal money. And I'm asking you if the world where we only use Bitcoin,
I know what you're saying,
qualifies as zero inflation rate.
Because it's going to be deflationary. We agree on that. That's sort of
so
the
it would not.
assumption.
You'd say it would not qualify as zero inflation rate, and it would not qualify as ideal money.
He's not talking about the purchasing power of it. He's talking about the relationship between the world currencies. This is what the argument is about. So, like, I understand, Paul, that.
Yeah, but then the rate would be 1. It would be a 1-to-1 ratio if it was Bitcoin everywhere. It wouldn't be a 0% over time, to the extent that even makes any sense.
But he's not trying to target the purchasing power of money. He's trying to get the political component out of the money supply. That's what he's got. 14 essays, 20 years of lectures and writing, and that is what it's about. It is absolutely not about targeting the purchasing power of the money. There's no one who's read that and is familiar.
It may be, it may be or may not be. I don't see the relevance. I'm just asking you a very simple question, and I think you're just leading it off into this very strange wilderness of 14 papers and whatever. I'm just asking you if you think. You just said a moment ago, and this is not trying to be a gotcha thing. I'm really just trying to figure out what's going on here, because I find it very confusing, and I think that lots of stuff is being intentionally just moved through very quickly, and I just want a very simple answer to this question. And it seems that the answer is yes. So it seems to me that according to you, if John Nash were here, he would say that in a world where everyone only uses Bitcoin, that would qualify as there being a 0% inflation rate over time, because there would be no Forex market.
He didn't say what you're saying.
No, but would he say? No, I said would he said that? Would he say that or not? I don't. Is really does this question have a yes or no answer, or is it like some weird other thing is going on here? Because I think it should just. I think the answer is no, but maybe you're saying Nash would say it was yes. I don't know.
I'm saying you are implying he said something and asking me to say yes or no. And
Wait,
no, I said would. No, I said would if he were here.
Do you feel like you know enough about John Nash to represent his thoughts here? Because I think you said you researched all his traversed all of his stuff, right?
I'm not expressing his thoughts. I'm expressing the logic of the argument.
Okay, so maybe Paul's question? You're saying Paul's question. You can't answer Paul's question because you just don't know. Is that the answer?
No. He's implying that John Nash made a proposal in which you target the purchasing power of money.
So you're just saying it's an invalid question.
It's an invalid question.
Okay.
It's not about that
question. Okay.
Well, I don't really believe that question broken.
Apparently, you're asking, will John Nash rape children again? That's what you're asking.
I know,
yes or no?
No. But I'm saying he's representing this argument. He just said blah blah blah. He read all this stuff and he knows everything back to front. And I'm just saying, if John Nash were here, what would he answer this question? But he's saying that he rejects the premise for some reason that John Nash could answer this question. So I guess he would say, I don't know. I mean, I just don't know what's going on here. I really feel like I'm getting more confused.
Another way of saying this. I lost my train of thought on it. It'll come back.
Don't worry, Joe.
Okay. Well, I'm going to return to my train of thought because I thought it was very simple. That so you're saying that John Nash would say, and I'm using the this is called the hypothetical world. It's just like how.
I'll let you do that. I didn't mean to go against it. You misheard. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm saying if he were here, would he describe a world where everyone only uses Bitcoin as money, would he describe that world as having a zero inflation rate?
No.
Yeah, I think he would. I also think he would say no, and I think I would say no as well. And I think the Fed would say no. I think everyone would agree on no, because everyone agrees that it's deflationary, right?
Right.
So
Now,
I'm really happy we came to an answer.
Well, yeah, well, that's what I said, and that's all I said in the first sentence of my little tweet. That is like the original Genesis tweet that sparked this.
Oh, now you're
whatever
saying,
this is.
I remember my thought. What I'm saying is that the impartial observers listening to this are going to realize that you're implying that he was targeting the purchasing power, and they're going to read the argument and realize that you're wrong and I'm right.
Okay, all right. Well, okay, we'll get back to that in a second. We'll get back to that in 1 second, though. But then you said the second thing, other than the world where only Bitcoin being ideal money, which I guess I'm not sure if that was refuted or not, but we'll come back to it maybe. You also said a world where there was this weird policy where blah, 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 value targeting, something, something, something. And that was the second sentence in my tweet that I just said, I don't think that Bitcoin will coexist in a world where it's successful. Like right now, Bitcoin it's pre-successful. It's speculative, and it's not clear that it will survive. But if it does survive, I think it will just slowly take over. So that's my little opinion voiced in the middle of a tiny little tweet.
Yep.
And so I'm just saying that I don't think the second situation is one that is sound, because I don't think it will eventually describe our world under any circumstance, because I don't think that Bitcoin will coexist with all these central bankers. People will be like, I do all my transacting in crypto anyway. Why don't I just save all this crypto? And then why do I need all this fiat money that could just be garnished, or that I could, taxed or whatever? And they say, well, I don't want to do that. So blah, blah. But that's just a little opinion of mine. And so that's all I said in this Genesis tweet that sparked this sort of controversy. And so there's really just those two major components of it that I don't think that John Nash would describe Bitcoin as ideal money. So we'll go back to that one. But that's just what I'm saying, is that
wasn't
Bitcoin
a question
doesn't have the zero inflation rate.
That wasn't the question you asked, right? You didn't say, would he describe Bitcoin as ideal money? You said, would he describe it as non-inflationary, right?
Right. But would he describe ideal money as having a zero inflation rate?
No.
Oh, well, then you should change your Wikipedia article, I think. Because you say very clearly that he said that, and that doesn't jive with what I know about it as well, because he talks about transferable utility.
Right. It doesn't jive with what you know about it, but you started this conversation admitting that you don't know the argument very well. You haven't even read it all. Man. You're telling me I have a reading.
I know, but it's a total waste of time, because the argument doesn't apply.
Everyone is going to see that you did this.
No, but you're asking like this is some kind of gotcha thing. It's very smart not to read. You can't read everything in the world, and I think my understanding is I'm still waiting to be educated on what John Nash really thought about what ideal money was.
There's like 15 minutes, 20 minutes. You said you have to go. So can you give us a short, maybe 1 minute, if it's that long, understanding of the gold standard and why it was maybe good or bad, or what's your thoughts on that?
Well, maybe, but I still don't actually understand what in my tweet you don't agree with, because I say that. So I guess you're saying that you think that John Nash used a different definition of. John Nash would describe Bitcoin, according to you, as deflationary. So he would say that Bitcoin does not have a zero inflation rate.
I have to give you the
so
context.
For you, ideal money is something other than Bitcoin itself.
Hey, John. Let Zhao talk. Be as assertive as possible. So,
okay,
be assertive. What do you think Paul thinks? And then, Paul, don't interrupt Zhao. Just be real assertive and concise. What do you think Paul thinks and how he's wrong?
I have to give the context. If you don't have the context, how could we be like this is right or wrong? Once I give the context,
Go for it.
And so we were on the gold standard at certain times, or sort of de facto gold standards, say with Bretton Woods, and we broke off of that. It was favorable for its time, but then we broke off, and some economists say, see, this is why it's bad. To peg your money to gold puts pressure on the supply of gold. It puts pressure on the geopolitical concerns of the mining start to come into play. It's not necessarily an ideal peg. It worked good, but there's limitations to it. Now, you could peg your money to a currency like the US dollar, and you end up just giving your sovereignty to them. So gold worked, but the pressure that it puts on the commodity and the way that we produce it, it's too singular. So Nash suggests, well, we could make an ICPI, which is an international CPI. And then you could use different commodities, and then that would be less centralized, right?
Well, I don't really care, but sure. What do you mean less centralized?
It's not just on the price of gold, and then say China controls all the gold mining. Well, you've just put the world on China's standard. But if you use gold and silver and you weighted these prices, you can have an index that everyone uses, and then you could all peg your money to. It would be less.
Yes. Okay. Gotcha.
Okay, so that's what Nash calls the ICPI. But then he says, but there's a problem with this. A miracle energy source could come along, and this would dramatically alter some of the prices. And so you would need to reweight it and readjust it. But this reintroduces the problem that you're trying to solve, which he's trying to solve, which is getting the politics out of the supply of money. He's not trying.
Exactly.
Right. So look what happens when you look at Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't have these problems. If a miracle energy source comes along, the difficulty adjustment algorithm senses the extra energy, the hash power coming on, and it adjusts the supply accordingly. Bitcoin Nash didn't propose something. He left the solution unfixed, unsolved. And Bitcoin fits into his argument perfectly.
So you're saying the 12.5 Bitcoins that haven't been mined out yet are the IC,
what you need is a price signal that is apolitical enough and strong enough that it doesn't create supply shocks. And then we still have the argument, well, I don't think banks should do it.
I don't actually think it is, because think about this though, because it depends. It just changes it from being where the gold is geographically located in the ground to which countries have cheaper energy or better ASIC chip fabrication or something like that.
So
it's not that different, really.
So you think
the gold metaphor is still better, I think.
Oh, you think gold would be better? A technological?
I think gold. No, the gold metaphor is better for Bitcoin.
That as a gold standard.
Because there's no, as you say, there's no reweighting. So how can it be an index of industrial production?
No, it's self-adjusts. That Satoshi's difficulty adjustment removes the need for politicians to reweight over time. You don't need anyone to do that. You can just. No one controls the price. No one controls the entire production, and no one controls the supply.
No, but I think you're conflating control over the supply. Like, no one controls the supply of gold that's been mined out of the ground. But you were saying the process of mining, because there's a lot of gold in like South Africa and I forget parts of Russia and other places. Sorry?
Geopolitical considerations.
Right, exactly. Yeah, but those are back in terms of the fact that some places have better cooling and better hydroelectric power and better, ASIC chip fabrication. I mean, that's what people would say about the Chinese mining right now. They say, well, instead of having the gold being buried in China, all the ASICs are in China. And so in practice, it makes no difference. So it's basically just Bitcoin is just gold, but where the gold is buried in China instead of in South Africa.
I think that there's an argument out there that this system is so decentralized that no one can corrupt it. And I realize we haven't proved that, But let's
No,
give
but
me that caveat.
gold is even less easier. The gold is less corruptible than Bitcoin. It's just an element. It doesn't do anything. So I think gold.
Steel man me that point for 1 second, please, and give it to me, because I want to ask you if you think that if Bitcoin starts to rise and become a real thing and put pressure on central banks, do you think that they will let their currencies hyperinflate, knowing that they can, this whole conversation has been about, they can value target and inflation target?
Well, they're not. And I think the answer is no, because they're not omnipotent, right? They will do whatever they can to, fulfill whatever their mandate is. In the case of the United States, it is this famous dual mandate of price stability and full employment, which is itself a conversation for another time. But they will try to do whatever they can do, but they can't work magic. They can't there's some things that no one can do. So I think they won't have a choice.
But they can.
That was the second part of my tweet, the Genesis tweet that set all this off. Is I just think in practice they won't. People just won't want to use banknote money anymore. They just won't find it useful.
So now, of course, money will be digital by then. It would be like a digital US dollar, but they can value target Bitcoin, and such that their money would be not so inflationary anymore. It would be on par with Bitcoin, and then you would lose that reason. One of the main reasons why everyone says we need Bitcoin, because there's the country.
They would be like a Bitcoin bank, and you're saying that they would give you a certain amount of Bitcoin, and it would be like the Eastern Caribbean dollar or something, where it'd be pegged 2.5 to US dollar, and you're in practice using dollars, but it has a different name.
So Nash's argument is that all the central banks in the world, in response to an international e-currency with a stable supply, they are going to do this. They are going to feel pressure from its use, and they're going to.
Right. So you agree? That's exactly what I say in the tweet. I don't believe in the second sentence. That's exactly what I say. I don't think it will happen. So that's exactly what I said, which I think is totally still 100% logically coherent and a correct interpretation of 100% correct interpretation of the Nash's argument.
That's
exactly what I said. I said 100%. I mean, I really think I'm clearing this one with flying colors, in fact, because the tweet said two things. The second one, I think we are in complete agreement on, that Nash thinks that Bitcoin and these fiat currencies will continue to coexist forever, and I don't. I think that, but that's just my opinion. But you say that that's Nash's theory, is that this will be some kind of gold reserve instead of it will be a Bitcoin reserve instead of a gold reserve as we had, 50, 100 years ago, et cetera, Bretton Woods, blah, blah, blah. And I just think it's my opinion that won't happen, because the banknote money was superior to gold in a few ways, namely the ability to send it long distances and have checking accounts and send wire transfers and other stuff like that. So, but Bitcoin is going to beat banknote money on all those. So I just don't think that but it doesn't matter, because my tweet just gave my little opinion that John Nash thinks that ideal money would be, it's kind of like this Bancor thing. I hate to bring this up because I can just tell that you're just militantly anti-Keynesian, and even though most people are not
it's relevant. It's relevant. It's very relevant.
Yeah, the Bancor, right? What I'm talking about. There was yeah.
Nash didn't bash Keynes. He bashed Keynesian theory, and Keynes did not get his way with the Bretton Woods.
Exactly.
And we didn't
That's what I was going to bring up.
What Nash.
Okay, good. So that's good. So that's what I'm saying. So we're on the same page with all that, I think. Then. Yes. So, but I don't, that was just my opinion, that I don't think that Bitcoin and the fiat currencies will coexist forever, which is the second part of my tweet. So that's good. That's just, obviously, maybe you think, I don't know actually what you think. So do you believe that that's likely? I guess you do, because that's what you were saying before, that you think that the central banks will just re-change. What they will do is they'll make their currencies deflationary like Bitcoin, and that people will decide to use them because they'll be marginally as convenient. That's what you think is going to happen. Yep.
Yes. So you've said that you believe you understand Nash's argument, but you don't think he's correct in what he is going to happen.
I think I would say that because, well, not now. I don't know what he was thinking when he wrote it, but I think now that Bitcoin is here, there's no need for ideal money. It's like better than ideal because it has instead of a 0% inflation, it has a negative inflation. So instead of being able to buy all the stuff today that you can buy, or all the stuff tomorrow that you can buy today, you can not only buy all the same stuff that you bought today tomorrow, but you can buy even more stuff. So it's even better.
George,
It's ideal plus.
Ideal plus. All right. I want to note that. Bitcoin is ideal plus money.
Right, but it's not. It wouldn't qualify. So maybe we have to return to the first point, which is where I say that Bitcoin is not. We agree that Bitcoin is not a 0% inflation rate.
Yeah, we don't agree.
But then you've quoted John Ideal Money on Wikipedia for like 1 or 2 sentences saying that it would have a 0% inflation rate.
He didn't say.
But then you still say that you have that. So I think you're saying that there's something special about Ideal Money where it can be built on Bitcoin that has a deflation and yet still have a 0% inflation rate. I mean, I really don't understand that part.
It's because the argument is far more complex than you can just take a glance at.
Hey Paul, one moment. I want to give Jal just a little bit, just like 2-3 minutes, just straight. Can you be as succinct and concise? Just what is Paul getting wrong? Because you keep, maybe he hasn't researched all of John Nash's work or whatever. Because I'm still a little bit confused on that. Is it possible for you to even take that short amount of time and explain it, or is it just too complex?
It's if an economist is trying to stabilize the purchasing, like if they want a stable unit of purchasing power over time, at least like half the economists laugh him out of the room. Now, Paul's given the caveats to it, and they're complex, so it's okay. But it's something with his caveats we do agree on. It becomes a derogatory observation of Nash's work, and it's not what his proposal is. His proposal is that an international currency is going to arise, and then central banks, in response to that, are going to be forced to match their inflation with that signal. And so, if I skip to
but do you see there's this fork in the argument though, where you either go up and we say that Bitcoin has taken over and everyone uses Bitcoin only, and then or we go down and Bitcoin shows up, and then there's this weird quasi Bretton Woods system.
Yes. So why are those two the same? Why am I saying that they're the same?
Right, you are saying they're the same.
They are the same because when the price.
But they're not though, because it's a fork. Either in the real world people are using Bitcoin everywhere, or they're not. So they're not the same.
Then you should give me a chance to explain right now.
Okay, great.
So when the price, in each scenario, when the price of a commodity changes in, say, China and US, you know that it's a function of the local supply demands. You know that it's not because of political intervention in the money supply. Both those scenarios do that. If everyone only uses Bitcoin, right, then the change of the price in China of bananas, and if it's different than the supply trend in the US, then that's a proper price signal. It's not because of intervention in the money supply. And that's the same thing if all of the banks have the value stabilized versus Bitcoin, you'd have the same scenario. That scenario is ideal money. They are both ideal money.
No. But you're saying a scenario in which some Bitcoin is used everywhere.
There's only Bitcoin.
Right. That scenario, I really don't understand how you can square that. I still don't understand how you square this with the zero inflation. You don't agree that inflation and purchasing power are the same thing? Is that where it diverges? I don't understand where we're really diverging somehow.
So
to me it's so simple.
If everyone's using the same value standard, right, and that value standard goes up and then it goes down, but everyone prints money in relation to it so that they're all value stable, any differences in the price of two locations are necessarily a function of supply and demand, and not political intervention in the supply of money, not arbitrary.
No, I understand what you're saying, that the countries could all inflation tax each other at random rates, making it very confusing to know exactly what's going on. In practice, there are a lot of, people buy futures and options on the Forex market, which is enormous. There's more Forex trading on the markets than there actually is international trade. So people, at tremendous expense to them, they try to hedge all this risk out. And so I understand that that is a real phenomena that people find problematic, but I don't understand. I really think, I don't know, maybe, I don't know what's going on here, but I really think that for me, it's simple. Bitcoin is not zero inflation, and ideal money is zero inflation. And so from there, it's just very simple that Bitcoin is not ideal money because it doesn't meet this one thing. So maybe I haven't understood, maybe I misunderstood something, but that's still what I feel. I really don't understand.
Okay. So Jal, why don't you respond to that? And Paul won't. You get a minute, Jal, and then we'll ask a couple questions, and then we'll wrap up because we're a little bit past 8. So, Jal, why don't you respond to that? And then we'll take a couple, because I've been writing down some questions, and then we'll do some final thoughts before we wrap up. Okay.
Right on, and I appreciate how you moderated this. So what I said was there's a similarity between a world where there's only Bitcoin and a similarity between a world where all centrally bank money or all the major currencies value targeted. And at first it doesn't appear like there could be, because they're a fork, like Paul says. But there's one important similarity. You've taken the political aspect out of the money supply, and so what happens is eventually a country says, well, we have to devalue our money based on imports and exports. Well, it's really useful, and it's actually not an evil thing they sell to the public. In Canada, when the oil prices tank, we happily devalued because then we can keep up selling, and so there's a short-term reason to do it, but long-term you don't want that. Each of these scenarios, if Bitcoin becomes ubiquitous, or if Bitcoin is targeted on, if centrally bank monies are targeted on Bitcoin, they both do that. And that is what Nash is trying to do. That's what his whole argument is about. It's not about the purchasing power of money. I understand how you could misconstrue based on that, if that's the right word, based on that quote, but it's very easy to check this. You just go and you start reading it and you start understanding his argument, and you can tell.
Okay, well, with that being said, let's because I know we have some viewers. The first one's for Paul. Vagabond. Ask Paul if he sees the use in Bitcoin being a singular conduit for all other currencies to reach equilibrium, with thus allowing naturalized inflation rates globally in response to supply, and not currency.
The answer to that, yes. Yeah, the answer to that question is yes, because there's no difference to me. If everyone's using Bitcoin as money, then there's no difference between people using it to set the price of oil or garbage trucks or whatever. Then they can use it to set the price of any other collectible object, which would include any US dollars that might still exist or anything else, gemstones, whatever. So the answer is yes.
Okay, and then Zhao, you have a question too. Ask Zhao if we will ever be conscious of ideal money, and that was coming from John Golson.
There's an ability, when we understand the importance of getting either one of these scenarios to work, Bitcoin is the only currency, or all our currencies value targeted. When we understand that importance, like, you had to solve this problem with non-cooperative strategy. You had to assume everyone's selfish and irrational. But when we understand the importance, we can all of a sudden get rational. Nash calls it rationalization. And we can move, we can talk about it and move to this standard. So that's the answer to that.
Okay. So unfortunately, I don't really feel like we got to the point where, okay, we agree that we disagree on like these couple points.
Oh, well, I changed my mind. I mean, so apparently I have a sudden interest in what on earth Nash thinks about. I'm suddenly have an interest in what on earth Nash thinks inflation is. So I'm very curious about that all of a sudden.
I've been asking that from the beginning.
That is why I called you a liar, and I'm sorry for anything other than the fact that, or for everything other than that, perhaps I piqued your interest.
Okay, great.
You're very hard to get face to face like this.
Oh, well, you know, I'm a busy guy. I really, honestly, I don't think that I'm still a little confused because I really feel like the first scenario is pretty cut and dry, that ideal money has this ideal 0% inflation rate, and that Bitcoin does not, and so Bitcoin is not ideal money. And then you said that the first and second scenarios were the same, so then it seems like it's almost doubly not ideal money. But I don't know. I'm not sure. I think we're cycling on that conversation, and so I'm not sure how progress can be made on it. But who knows?
You'll have to traverse the argument for yourself.
Well, I'm so happy we came to that great conclusion to this block time episode, and the nonsense just been found, Paul. This has been a terrific episode. I learned so much about inflation. You know, I learned about John Nash.
The funny thing is,
you know,
the funny thing is Scott Sumner. I completely agree with Scott Sumner that it's like not even really, and I think Jal does as well. That it's like it's not even a real. Inflation is something that exists in the mind of central bankers and in meetings and in papers that are written. So I know it is real, but it's abstraction that is like not as meaningful as people think at all. So there you go. It's very funny.
All right, guys.
Disagreement hinges on something that is not that useful, in my opinion. There you go. Something that's not measurable, I will say, I guess.
Thank you for your time, Paul.
I was sincerely appreciate both y'all taking time to be part of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
All right. Bye, everybody.